All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. The New York Knicks just wrapped up their best regular season in a decade as they were able to win 47 games. The Knicks were then able to build off of that by winning their first playoff series in a decade as well, as there was plenty excitement brewing at Madison Square Garden. But as the Knicks were looking to advance to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time since 2000, they ran into a buzzsaw in the Miami Heat that not only defeated the Knicks in 6 games, but they also exposed New York's flaws. The eighth seeded Heat dictated things in this series from the word go. Jimmy Butler in game number one really established the tone of this series as he got the Knicks for 25 in that contest. And you would have thought that the Knicks would have been able to have learned from what Butler did to the Milwaukee Bucks in round number one. And for me, I do believe that the turning point in this series came in game number two. The Heat decided to sit out Butler for that contest, give him additional time to rest. And New York at home struggled to beat Miami. And Miami had an opportunity to win that game late, and they only lost that contest to the Knicks by 6 points without the services of Jimmy Butler. To me, I thought that was a turning point. You figure after Butler sustained the ankle injury in game number one on Sunday, he had a week to rest and rehab for game number three. And of course, Miami won both games three and four at home. A very close contest in game number five at Madison Square Garden. And then, of course, Miami was able to close out New York last night. The Knicks needed more from Julius Randle and RJ Barrett in this series, and they simply didn't get it. Randle for the season averaged more than 24 points per game, but in this series rather, it was 18.8, and he still did give the Knicks more than 10 boards per contest. Barrett did average close to 21 points in this series, but in the closeout game last night, he only scored 11 points, and that simply is not going to get it done. Jalen Brunson put the Knicks on his back, and he did it for the majority of the regular season. And of course, he did it here in this series. Brunson averaged 31 points and more than 6 assists per contest. You look at his last 3 games: 32 points in game number four, 38 in game number five to help the Knicks stave off elimination, and even 41 last night, even though it was not good enough for the Knicks to be able to force a game number seven. Now, no disrespect to the Knicks, but in this series, they got exposed for what they are. The Knicks are currently a team of guys that are second and third and maybe fourth options on offense. The Knicks simply do not have that guy that can take over and put a team on his back consistently. Yes, credit to Jalen Brunson. We saw him do all he could, especially with his over my dead body mentality. And it wasn't not on my watch was it going to happen. But still, no disrespect to Jalen Brunson. He's a solid player, but that he's not a star that the Knicks can put everything around. And of course, the further that you go into the postseason, obviously, the harder that it gets. But you need those star players that are going to be able to not only take that big shot late in the contest, but those are going to be the guys that are going to consistently give you 35 and 40 and do whatever it takes to win. The Knicks simply don't have that. They don't have that guy that's not only going to elevate his game, but also the teammates around him. And that is something that is going to hinder the Knicks' chances in the postseason going forward. Now, don't get me wrong about Brunson. In 1 year in New York City, he has not only become a fan favorite, but he's also a building block for this team. And we saw how important that Brunson was to two teams this year. Think about it. The Dallas Mavericks this time last year were getting set to take on the Golden State Warriors in the Western Conference Finals. You take Jalen Brunson out of the picture, not only is Dallas not in the postseason or right now for the Western Conference Finals, they didn't even make the postseason. They didn't even make the play-in tournament. And of course, Luka Doncic still put up great individual numbers, but he wasn't able to like really put that team on his back like he had, at times in the postseason last year. And to me, Jalen Brunson was the perfect sidekick for him. Now, fast forward to this year, Brunson comes to the Knicks, and he gave them that floor general that could bring it all together. He also gave them a solid scoring option from the point guard position. And in an era of positionless basketball, which works for some teams and does not work for others, nonetheless, Jalen Brunson is a legitimate ball handler. Jalen Brunson is also a legitimate floor general and a point guard in the truest sense of the term. Old school basketball fans will know what I'm talking about. But even with that said, for Brunson, for everything that he did this past season in a Nick uniform. Obviously, he's a building block for this franchise going forward. But who is going to go on the journey with him? You look at it, Julius Randle, who has become an ire of criticism from beat writers in the New York City area to fans to shock jocks, you name it. But he still has 2 years left on his deal with the player option for 2026. But the biggest question is going to be, does the Knicks front office believe or still believe in Jay Rand? I'll tell you like this: Julius Randle is a solid player, and he improved from his time in the league. You think back to a guy who was a top 10 pick of the Los Angeles Lakers, coming out of Kentucky after 1 year. Of course, he had the broken leg in the first game of the season, derailed his rookie season. Never really reached his potential with the Lakers. We saw the development of Julius Randle when he went to the Pelicans, and then from there he came to the Knicks. The biggest problem to me with Julius Randle, we're talking about a guy who is a classic tweener. And it's one of those where I say that because he tries to be too much of a small forward when he needs to focus more on being a power forward. Julius Randle, too often, it gets in love with playing on the perimeter, is in love with taking the 3-point shot. And at the end of the day, Julius Randle is not a perimeter player. Julius Randle is not a consistent threat from deep. I said this last year. I said this when this season began. Julius Randle is one of those guys that needs to focus, number one, on playing from 15 feet and in, working on his post game, because I feel at his size and with his athleticism, Julius Randle is a guy that could be a consistent force for the Knicks closer to the basket. It's okay to have the perimeter shot in your repertoire, but that is not his bread and butter. And the more that Julius Randle continues to take outside shots, the more that he's going to hinder the Knicks, and the more that he's going to hear the boo birds, you name it, from the fans at MSG. Julius Randle, to me, is one of those classic guys, and this isn't a disrespect to Brunson. He's a prototypical wing playing alongside some of the great point guards, Isaiah Thomas, Steve Nash, Magic Johnson, Jason Kidd, and those veins. But at the end of the day, I feel like the Knicks are not utilizing Julius Randle to his strengths, and Julius Randle, first and foremost, is not utilizing his strengths to the most because he's focusing on trying to be something that he is not, which is a perimeter player. You look at the Knicks, they just extended RJ Barrett last September, which means he is not going anywhere anytime soon. But there are some question marks on this team. Will Josh Hart exercise his player option at nearly $13 million next season, or will he test the waters in free agency? I mean, Hart was a guy that came over just before the trade deadline from the Portland Trailblazers. And, he was a guy that, he sparked things for the Knicks. I was calling them the Villanova Knicks. Of course, you have Brunson and Hart, who were teammates at Villanova. They won a championship together for Jay Wright there. But nonetheless, I've said this for Josh Hart, rather, as soon as he came out of college, there's not too many systems in the NBA where he cannot play in. And I say that due to his versatility on both ends of the court. You talk about a guy who's a solid defender, but then also offensively, he's one of those guys. He knows how to move without the ball in his hands. He knows how to get to the basket. He's one of those guys where you know what, you don't have to run a play for him, but he's going to find a way to score. Guys like that are very, valuable to playoff contending teams. And if Josh Hart does decide to test the waters in free agency, the Knicks might not be able to afford him. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. Player options for Obi Toppin, Quentin Grimes, and Emmanuel Quickly. All of those are definitely on the cheap. You figure Toppin has an option, excuse me, just under 7 million for next year. Quickly, just over four. Grimes about 2.5. And the thing is, for with Obi Toppin, I've said from the word go, he's a guy who the Knicks have not utilized his strengths. The Knicks, like a lot of other teams in the NBA, are trying to make bigs into perimeter players. That's not what made Obi Toppin the National Player of the Year his final year at Dayton. And of course, that year, I do believe he went sixth overall to the Knicks in the draft. Forgive me if I am wrong on that. I'm just taking a guess. But it's one of those where he was a National Player of the Year at Dayton, of course. We didn't have the NCAA tournament, so we don't know what he really could have shown on that big stage. Might have taken his draft stock a little bit higher, but nonetheless, Obi Toppin, if you go back to his time at Dayton, he was a guy who was getting to the basket, high flyer, you name it. And the Knicks have tried to take that away from him. And I really think, even if Obi Toppin were to go someplace else and you have a team that knows how to utilize his game, I really think he's going to flourish. I'm not sure if he is going to properly flourish in the blue and orange for the Knicks. I do expect New York to at least attempt to trade Evan Fournier in the offseason. You're talking about a guy who's set to make nearly $19 million for next year, and he has a team option for the following year at 19. The Knicks have never really gotten the productivity out of Fournier that they needed when they signed him as a free agent several summers ago. And it's going to be very interesting to see if they could try to package him to a team and get off of his salary. Of course, there are going to be some people who are going to ask, is Tom Thibodeau the right head coach for the Knicks going forward? And you look at it like this: in 3 years as a head coach of the Knicks, Tibbs has gotten them to the playoffs twice, two winning records. Of course, you can make a very strong case 2 years ago that the Knicks did overachieve when they got to the playoffs. And of course, they got exposed when they lost to the Atlanta Hawks. Took a step back last year, but this team got back on track this year. A big part of it was, signing Jalen Brunson in free agency. Tom Thibodeau is a guy, he has a reputation as far as, running his guys into the ground. And then also you think about Thibodeau's teams, great defensive teams, they love to grind it out. We didn't see that defensive intensity from the Knicks this year. So it's going to be interesting to see if Leon Rose and Scott Perry still do believe in Tom Thibodeau. But nonetheless, I do believe that Tibbs will be the head coach of the Knicks when their season starts in the fall. Now, in this series, yes, New York was the higher seed in this series, but at the end of the day, Miami's just one of those teams that's equipped for the postseason. We saw that throughout, because to me, I felt like the Heat had some very questionable losses at times this season, should have been better than what they were. Even, they after losing their first playing game, it looked like maybe Miami's gonna, not make the playoffs. They came alive in the fourth quarter of, that last playing game against the Chicago Bulls, used that momentum to carry over to beat the Bucks, and of course, they kept it going here against the New York Knicks, and now they're back in the Eastern Conference Finals for the second consecutive year and the third time in 4 years. But nonetheless, Miami's just one of those teams. They're equipped for the postseason. They play D. You look at a guy like Jimmy Butler, and I say this: all of those Marquette guys that made the NBA during first Tom Crean era, and of course that was highlighted by Dwayne Wade. But then also, the Buzz Williams era. And of course, you had guys like Jimmy Butler, of course. Pardon me, his name is just escaping me right now for the Milwaukee Bucks right now. but nonetheless, it's one of those where those guys always had an edge to them. And of course, the Marquette guys, Jay Crowder, please forgive me, had a senior moment there. But nonetheless, all of those guys, and of course, those aren't the only Marquette guys from that era to make the NBA, but nonetheless, those guys always came to the league with a chip on their shoulders because they were overlooked coming out of high school. Marquette is not, I know they've won a national championship before, but they're not a national brand, if you will. And those guys had to fight, scrap, and claw to get to where they had to be. And Jimmy Butler, you know, is a shining example of that. So, for him going to Miami, in my opinion, it was a match made in heaven. He had that before when he first got to the Bulls, of course, when Tom Thibodeau drafted him. It just didn't fit for a variety of reasons with Minnesota and Philadelphia, respectively. And partially it was because in both of those stops, those organizations wanted him to be the third wheel. Jimmy Butler did not need to be the third wheel. He's not a third wheel. And now he's with Miami. Where he's the guy. You have Pat Riley and Eric Spoelstra. They're tough-minded guys. They love to play defense. They love to do the gritty work in order to win. And guess what? Jimmy Butler fits into that mold. And of course, your best player or players set the example. And you know what? He set the example last round because, like I said it before, and I will say it again. Jimmy Butler took the Milwaukee Bucks lunch money. He punked them throughout that series. Set the tone for Miami in game number one in this series. And then, of course, the rest is history. But at the end of the day, you got to throw the rule books and the seating out of the window. Miami is they're better equipped for the playoffs right now with their roster than the Knicks are. Just look at these playoffs as a whole. We got the Lakers, um, who are in the Western Conference Finals as a 7th seed. And of course, they defeated a 6th seed Golden State Warriors, two teams that are very equipped for the postseason, and both of them were worthy enough to, make a championship run. Obviously, Golden State season's over, but nonetheless, at this point of the season, you throw the rule book out of the window. TFX, what's going on, my man? You're saying Randall, he's so good in the regular season and in the playoffs, he drags the team down. And I will say this about Julius Randle. Doing it in regular season is totally different from doing it in the playoffs because you're playing a team that now has the opportunity to lock in for you for that 7-game set. And you go back to 2 years ago when the Knicks lost to the Hawks. Again, Julius Randle's a guy. He's not the guy. And Atlanta just basically said, you know what? We're going to make you work. And there was nobody else who was going to step up and carry the Knicks. That's why they lost in 5 games. The Knicks were able to win that series against the Cavs because, to their credit, they basically said, you know what? Donovan Mitchell, you're going to go out there and score, but you're going to have to work for it, and we're going to shut down everybody else. And that's what the Knicks did. And that was why the Knicks were able to dispose of the Cavs in 5 games, in my opinion. Different story with the Bucks, pardon me, with the Heat, rather. A better defensive team in the postseason so far, and they're just gritty and they scrap and they find a way. And then, of course, whereas Miami has that guy that you can look to in Jimmy Butler, the Knicks simply don't have it. They pay Randall like he's the guy, but nonetheless, he isn't. So you look at it, and it's like, of course, the question is going to be, what's next for the Knicks? I look at this team like this. It's going to be very interesting what Leon Rose and Scott Perry decide to do this summer because you look at this Knicks team, like I said before, Brunson's not going anywhere. Okay. RJ Barrett, after signing that extension last year, I highly doubt if he's going to go someplace. Julius Randle, would the Knicks try to package him to try to get a star player, or would a team be willing to take Julius Randle? Is the other question. I do think the Knicks are going to definitely go out there and try to shop Fournier. Right now, they have more than $118 million committed to player salaries for next season. So if they could find a way to shed some of that and bring in a star player to maybe just center everything around, well, you know what? The Knicks might have something. To your credit, yes, you're absolutely right, TFX. Brunson has been great. I think he's been worth the price of admission and then some. And I said this earlier this season when things looked bleak for the Dallas Mavericks. The Mavericks initially offered Brunson 4 years at 55 million. It took 104 million from the Knicks for 4 years to get him there. And I'll tell you like this, I guarantee you the Mavericks wish that they had matched the Knicks offer, because sometimes you don't appreciate what you have until it's gone. And honestly, 4 years at $104 million might look like being on the cheap side for Jalen Brunson right now, like in contrast to what he has been able to do this year. But for the Knicks going forward, at least for right now, you look at it like this: you got Boston, you got Philly. Like I said, throw out the seeds. You got Miami there. Um, these are the teams, and you still got Milwaukee. It's going to be very interesting to see who the Bucks bring in as their next head coach. But nonetheless, if you're the Knicks, those are the teams that you have to find a way to build your team up to, because these are the guys that you're going to have to beat in a 7-game playoff series in order to get out of the East. The Knicks don't have enough right now. They don't have obviously they don't have enough for Miami. They don't have enough for Boston, Milwaukee, or Philly in order to get past them. So if you're the Knicks brain trust, you have to sit down and say, what can we do in order to get past those teams in a 7-game playoff setting? Regular season doesn't matter, because you're playing guys on a night here. Some guys aren't playing their guys, all this other stuff, injuries, trades, you name it. So at the end of the day, the postseason is a totally different beast. But to the Knicks' credit, they did make some strides this year, winning 47 games, getting to the second round of the playoffs, bringing a lot of excitement to their fan base, and of course, Madison Square Garden. But getting to the playoffs and advancing multiple times are two different things. The Knicks are good enough to be a playoff team, but let's see what changes that they try to make over the summer to take that next step. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you are on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it will be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites on social media. TFX, as always, it was a pleasure. Thanks for the comments. Always, enjoy you on here, and definitely appreciate the support. And to all of the ladies in your family, a happy Mother's Day for the weekend. So all of the ladies out there, enjoy your Mother's Day, especially to my wife. So, folks, that's going to wrap it up. I'm William Martin signing off and saying thanks again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.